and thank you for joining me here today. You know, a topic that's very, very dear to my heart on this channel, we talk about often, is the topic of communication with sentient beings, including channeling methods. Another topic that's dear to my heart and my guest's heart is the topic of UFOs and those who command them or operate them. Well, you put those two together and what do you get? Well, you get channeling extraterrestrials. So welcome to Creative Visions TV. I'm your host, Karen Dahlman, and today we have a guest who does just that, who channels an ET. But let me tell you a little bit more about our guest before I bring him on. In 1973, he had 2 UFO close encounters in broad daylight. And that led him on a journey of discovering everything about UFOs he could, as well as other kind of related paranormal phenomenon. During the process of studying this, he ran into some channeling courses, and during a class, he received a telepathic message from someone who identified himself aboard those spaceships, those crafts he saw. And so that led into a great relationship that has gone now on for 34 years of channeling this beloved extraterrestrial. And so, not only is our guest a world-renowned channeler with 20 books, hundreds of CDs, DVDs with worldwide distribution, he also has a career that spanned 35 years. He's a very talented artist. He does miniature effects, storyboards. He creates sets and designs for major movie productions. He's also a very talented filmmaker, and he's written, directed, and produced 2 movies. One's called Dearly Departed, which I've watched before, and the other one is called First Contact. Now, I had the privilege, you guys, of attending the premiere preview of this movie, and it's fantastic. And we're going to get into that a little today with my guest. So also, he and his wife continue on their endeavors of creating feature films and television projects, and together they own a company called Zia Films. It is a production company located in Los Angeles. Okay, I know you guys know who I'm talking about. The extraterrestrial is none other than Bashar, and the ever-talented channel behind it is Darryl Anka. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Darryl Anka to the show. Welcome, Darryl. Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's great to have you here. And you guys, I want to say that I've met Darryl several times. I've been to his events where BASHARs come through and channeled. And I have to say this too. I have to show this, Darryl. I also met with Darryl privately to have a Bashar session, and really ended up being about mostly, I would say, 2/3 of it to almost 3/4 of it with Darryl directly. He really helped me with my own channeling, voice channeling abilities, which you guys all know. I channel currently through a board, and I do voice channeling as well. So I just want to say, Darryl, that was such a treat to have that experience with you.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure. I'm glad that it seemed to help, and thank you for doing what you do as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about how you got into this channeling and this relationship that developed with Bashar.
Sure. Well, some people know the story, and it basically, as you said, began with 2 broad daylight UFO sightings back in '73. First time about 150 feet away, second time only about 60, 70 feet away, a black equilateral triangle both times. After having seen something like that, I knew that the world was different than what I had been told. There were other things going on than we are typically taught, and I needed to figure out what that was, what was happening here, what did this represent? So I began doing research, and over the years ran into, of course, other books on different metaphysical subjects. And eventually, again, as you mentioned, I ran into a person who was actually conducting channeling seminars. And I listened for several months and thought the information coming through this person who was channeling this entity was very positive, constructive information that seemed to be capable of helping people. And when the entity coming through that channel offered to teach a channeling class, I went into it not because I thought I was going to become a channel. I was just continuing my research because I didn't understand how channeling could be taught. I thought it was just sort of something that happened to you automatically out of the blue. But during the course, which was a series of different guided meditations, to help you get in touch with whatever you wanted to get in touch with. It wasn't expected that you had to learn to channel an entity. But during one of the guided meditations, about halfway through the course, I did receive what I can only describe as a telepathic connection. The word Bashar was there in that moment. Now, I learned much later that that's actually an Arabic word, and it was probably chosen because part of my ethnic background is Arabic, but I don't speak the language at all. I had no idea what it was. I just thought it was the entity's name. But while this was all happening in my head, this memory came back of remembering and making an agreement to do this in this life with him. I understood at that moment that the UFOs I had seen had been shown to me on purpose to get me to start learning what I needed to learn, to move me in that direction. So when it came time to do the channeling, I would be more prepared. And the message that was there was, now it's time to begin if this is something you still want to do. Now, all of this flashed through my mind literally in a fraction of a second. And I didn't know if I was hallucinating, if this was a side effect of the meditation, with just my imagination, or what was going on. But it was very real. It was very solid. Now, the second this happened, I didn't say anything to anybody, but the entity coming through the channel who was teaching the class stopped talking to the class, stopped in the middle of the guided meditation, and turned right to me and said, "There is an entity here for you right now if you're ready." And I, opened my eyes. I was startled by that, but then I happened to glance behind me and I noticed that somehow one of the other classmates had picked up on the image that I saw in my head of Bashar, and she was actually sketching it on a piece of paper. So I immediately had two outside validations that it wasn't just my imagination. There was something happening here. And so I thought, all right, let's see where this goes. I kept practicing and channeling and bringing Bashar through in the class as best as I could at that time. I did well enough that the teacher asked me to co-channel the next series of classes with him, which I did. And eventually a woman came along who was doing one of the first doctoral thesis papers on a connection between psychology and channeling. And I became one of her subjects. And so what I would do was go to her house, I would channel for her friends, she would take her notes and write her paper. But the first week I did that, there were a few of her friends. And then, of course, word spread. The next week there were more of her friends.
Right.
More every week thereafter, until we actually had to start doing it twice a week. And then we had to start renting other auditoriums because the crowds just grew. And I started getting asked all over the world. And here I am almost 35 years later now, still doing that, along with, as you said, my parallel career as a filmmaker. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it grew.
Well, you've done all these years, and obviously you've been influenced by the teachings and work of Bashar. What do you see as his major teachings for humanity?
He basically explains the ideas that we take to be metaphysical concepts in terms that are more closely associated with physics. In other words, he really demystifies a lot of the old-fashioned definitions and brings them down to earth, no pun intended, in kind of a toolkit that we can really apply physically and get physical effects from and change our lives in very positive and constructive ways. So that's what I really appreciate about the information that comes from him is he explains very clearly the physical basis for these metaphysical concepts and how they actually work in physical reality, basically delivering what amounts to an instruction manual for how reality is constructed and how we can use it to our advantage to create the realities that we prefer.
Now, I've heard Bashar talk a lot about this toolkit. Maybe for example here in this video we're doing right now, maybe share with the audience a couple items that are in there that are very important to shifting and changing your lives.
Sure. The main focus of what he calls the instruction manual and the toolkit is the idea that we've all heard now about acting on your passion or following your bliss or however you want to say that. But there is still a lot of misunderstanding about what that really means and how to go about it and so on and so forth. So this is the beginning of what he calls the activation formula. To him, the idea of what we experience as passion or excitement or curiosity, whatever it is we're most attracted to explore, that sensation in our body, that feeling we have, to him is actually our body's translation of a signature frequency that represents our true essential self. Therefore, when you act on it, you're aligning with that energy, and it starts the ball rolling on a lot of other things that then unfold automatically for you in life. But the formula is very specific. The tools are very specific. The entire activation formula from Bashar is to act on whatever contains the highest amount of passion or excitement at any given moment to the best that you can act on it, taking it as far as you can until you can take it no further. And then you act on the next thing that contains the most excitement, even just a little bit more than any other option available to you. But you take these actions with absolutely, and this is the critical part, you take these actions with absolutely zero assumption or zero insistence on what the outcome of that action is supposed to look like or where you're supposed to wind up. Because basically what he's saying is our physical minds are relatively limited in their ability to imagine where we actually need to be. We can use symbols, we can use representations, we can use visualizations, we can create goals that represent the idea of an ideal outcome, but we don't really absolutely know that what we're picturing is the best way that should happen for us. So what he's basically saying is when we drop the idea of insisting on the way we think it should look, we're actually opening up and freeing ourselves from the limitations of our physical mind and allowing our non-physical higher mind to actually answer that energy that we've created, that state of being of passion and excitement that acts kind of as a placeholder for the higher mind to bring us through synchronicity what it is that we actually do need next to experience. And we have to really stay in a positive state with whatever comes, because if we do something like putting a negative meaning to whatever shows up, then we're only able to extract a negative experience from it. But if we remain in a positive state, even if what shows up is what we objectively don't prefer, staying in a positive state will allow us to actually extract a positive experience from that thing. And it proves to us that it's not really about what happens in life as much as it is what we do with what happens. And that changes everything. It changes the synchronicity, how we experience it in our lives. It activates a whole treasure chest of tools that move us forward along the path of least resistance. Remarkable things start happening when we use this formula, when we act on our passion, when we use the instruction manual as he's laid it out. And the thing that, again, is the most important thing to understand is that it's not just left in this sort of woo-woo, airy-fairy realm of, well, it's just positive thinking. It explains literally why this works, why physical reality is structured this way, and you actually do get to experience great changes in your life physically. Everything just really turns around for you. It's pretty remarkable.
And this is when all the synchronistic things start happening. People show up, things happen, ideas come to you because you're allowing this higher mind to work through you.
In a positive sense, because synchronicity is always happening. But what most people don't understand is there is negative and positive synchronicity. Yeah. So it's like whatever state of being we remain in, that's what gets reinforced by the synchronicity. So the instruction manual that Bashar delivers is specifically designed to allow us to take advantage of positive synchronicity in our lives rather than experiencing negative synchronicity.
So what would you say, and what does Bashar say? Because I know you also have been teaching some courses as well on some of these topics. What would you say to somebody? I get this a lot because my guides also talk about following your greatest joy and then follow the next greatest joy. But people say, well, I've got bills to do and I got things, to take care of and obligations. And how can I go find joy when I've got to do these other things?
Well, first of all, again, this goes back to the idea that the kit contains tools that are self-perpetuating, self-expanding, self-guiding, and they don't leave any of that stuff out because it's all-inclusive in what we need in life. If we need to thrive here, we need to survive here, there are certain things that need to happen so that we can live a joyful life. The thing of it is what people don't understand is it's a self-contained kit. And that means, in a sense, it knows what we actually need. And if we're open to letting it, it will actually bring us what we need. Now, sometimes it's different than what we want. because we don't always know what we really need. Sometimes we think we do, but we may not actually know that. However, it will always bring us what we truly need to be able to continue to act on our excitement. It's just that what has to go with it is an expansion of our definitions of what we think things are and how we think things work that aren't necessarily so. So it's about dropping old definitions that limit us from being able to let other kinds of experiences come in that actually can support us every bit as fully as what we think we need for support. Because as Bashar explains, there are many forms of abundance. Yes, on earth we have money. That's one symbol of exchange. It's one symbol of abundance, but it's not the only one. And when people start insisting, well, I need this amount of money, or I need that amount of money, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, they're actually closing the doors through which other forms of abundance can come. If someone comes along and actually gives you something, gives you a gift, and you don't need money to receive that thing, that's another form of abundance. Synchronicity is another form of abundance, where you just wind up where you need to be, when you need to be there, receiving exactly what you need at that moment. So if we open up to different forms of abundance and don't insist on just one being the only valid one, then if we need some money, that will come. But other forms of abundance may need to complete that picture to give us the 100% version that we need to continue to act on our excitement. And, I really, before I even knew these principles, it's just the way I'm built. I have always in my life just always acted on my passion. I've never thought about how I'm going to be supported. And I've been doing this for just naturally for most of my life. And I have to say, I have always been supported. Things are always there when I need them. It does work. So it's about relaxing that stress level of thinking you need to really say, I've got to control this. It's got to happen this way. There are just so many more ways that things can happen in our life that it's important to open up to those probabilities and allow them to come into your life. Otherwise, things are just too restrictive and we struggle through life, and that's not fun.
I think you hit on a really important part here when you said, to me, it's the key is this allowing and trusting, and that what you think you need, give it up to this higher mind, this higher self aspect, and that knows better what you need for your life to be full of all kinds of prosperity, abundance. And I think it's worth, really repeating that for people to fully understand it, because you're saying you're doing this right now naturally in your life.
Yeah, I do. I mean, going into, the arts, going into film and all that. I mean, I just followed my passion. And when I did, the most amazing synchronicities happened that got me where I needed to go. Whereas if I had thought I'd had to go through this in a typical way, I probably never would have gotten there, and certainly not as easily as I did. So it's kind of like you almost need to understand that it's like the physical mind is down in the valley and it's wandering around, and there's all these mountains and hills, and it can't necessarily see around the next corner. But the higher mind is on the mountaintop. It can see where you're going, and it can see what's ahead. And if you allow it to guide you by following your passion, because that's actually the communication from the higher mind. That's how we translate it. That's a communication from the higher mind. It's like, do this now, because that's where you need to be. And that's the path of least resistance, so you don't go falling into holes by thinking you know where you're supposed to be going, but you can't really see the path ahead, but the higher mind can. So it's guiding you through life. And if you listen, things get a lot easier. If you refuse to listen, there's a lot more resistance and things get a lot harder.
Yeah, it's learning to trust, and that's not always easy for people. But I do know from some of the ways that Bashar lays it out, and you're laying it out right now, if you can give over to yourself to that passion, it's something you really, really, really enjoy. That's your higher self telling you this is the direction to go. It sounds simple.
It does, but there's an important point there, and you brought it up about the idea of learning to trust. It's actually not learning to trust. It's learning to trust what you prefer, because we already trust something to be true, but a lot of people trust in the negative.
Ah,
And
great
therefore,
point.
it's not something we have to learn how to do. Trust is built in. We are always trusting something is true. We're always confident about something. We are never not confident that something is true. The issue is, what are you confident in? What are you trusting in? So sometimes when people think, well, I have to learn to trust, that sounds difficult. But when you understand, no, you're already trusting. You're an automatic trust machine. It's just pay attention to what you're trusting and just focus your trust in that direction instead of the other one, because that's what determines the effect of what you're trusting in. So it's important to let people know that they don't have to really learn the basics. They're already doing the basics. The mechanisms are already built into them. It's automatic. They can't help it. Now it's just a matter of focusing and making a choice. And that's not that difficult when you really realize that you prefer to trust this over that. Now, I understand that we can have belief systems that we've been brought up with that say, no, you shouldn't trust that. That's going to get you into trouble. That'll never work. That's too good to be true. All those wonderful sayings I've been taught growing up. I can guarantee you none of those negative concepts are actually true until you believe that they are. They're just ideas. They're just opinions. They're just perspectives. And they are equally valid to any other opinion, perspective, or belief that you want or choose to buy into. Once you buy into a belief, that's what you experience. It doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative, because there's no judgment on the part of creation about what it is you choose to buy into. You are allowed the freedom to choose, and you are supported unconditionally in that choice. It doesn't tell you you can't believe in something negative. It allows you the absolute freedom to do that, but it will support you just as easily when you decide to buy into something that's a positive belief as well. It doesn't differentiate. It doesn't matter what you choose. It will support you unconditionally.
It'll support you here or over here, depending on your choice. That's great.
Absolutely, because you're the one that is designed to give your life meaning.
Yeah.
And the meaning you give it determines the effect you get out of it. Again, from Bashar's point of view, this is pure physics. What you put out is what you get back. It's action, reaction. And it's just that physical reality is really nothing more than a reflective mirror. You can only perceive what it is you are giving out.
What would Bashar say then is the role of humanity? Why are we being born in this dimension, this third dimension, as humanity, as humans?
Well, we choose to, because it's an experience, a very valid and very powerful experience of learning to transform darkness into light, negative into positive, limitation into freedom. Because in a sense, we are greater beings. Our natural state is obviously bigger than physical reality. But you kind of have to forget who you are in order to remember who you are and discover who you are from another point of view. Because if you're just in a timeless state or something that's close to that, well, then by definition, there's no change. There's no growth. You almost have to limit yourself in order to discover a new way of unlimiting yourself. So it's a very interesting kind of idea that you kind of have to put these blinders on for a while and sort of tunnel vision.
Yeah.
But once you do that and you walk through these processes of living a physical reality life, then you get to see things from different perspectives in a very visceral way that drives home the idea that you now went through a process. You now had an experience that really locks the idea in for you that you are this greater being, but now you've discovered that from this perspective, and now you've discovered it in a different light from this perspective, and from this perspective, and it builds and builds and builds the idea of how rich you are from a whole new way of experiencing that, rather than what you can experience in non-physical reality. Equally valid, but just very different. Physical reality kind of, in a way, makes it a little bit more grounded, so to speak. It gives you a real experience of the process of becoming something, rather than just instantaneously knowing that you are. And that's a very rich way to experience yourself, by going through that transformation, that transition.
Well, I know Bashar, along these lines, Bashar considers humanity or humans masters of limitation. Do you want to talk about that a little further?
Sure. Now, it's, at first when he delivered that nickname,
Right.
it's like, okay, you're the masters of limitation. But he has also said, please remember, the idea is also that you are the masters of
Yes.
limitation.
Yes.
So it's not that we look at ourselves necessarily as a kindergarten class. It's that we are a master graduating class, that we know we are strong enough, powerful enough to actually transform these great limitations into freedom, this great depth of darkness into light, this great negativity we've been experiencing into positive energy. So it's really about understanding that we now are having this graduation of awakening into understanding more about how we create a reality and how to create it in a way that is more representative of mastering those limitations we placed upon ourselves in order to have this experience. It's an awakening to who we are.
This is the awakening that's happening right now for
Yeah.
humanity, isn't it?
Which is why we're having these conversations.
Exactly. And so what does Bashar say about the prognosis, or where's humanity going in the next, I don't know, let's say decade?
Well, that depends upon which fragment of humanity you're talking about, because obviously there are people choosing negative things to go in negative directions, and that's what they will experience. There are people choosing positive things in a positive direction, and that's what they will experience. Because when he talks about the idea that we're literally creating our own realities, we can experience a completely different reality from someone else who seems to be on the same planet. Bashar is actually saying we're not on the same version of Earth. It's actually beginning to split more and more and more into parallel versions of Earth. And whatever choices we make, those are the versions we're ultimately going to experience in totality. Now, we may for a while still be able to perceive the choices that others are making that are not necessarily the choices we prefer. But just because we can see them doesn't mean we're affected by them. It's just a neutral observation. But eventually, these different parallel versions of Earth will split farther and farther apart. We will gravitate to the ones that we are in vibrational compatibility with. And in the years to come, that's generally all that we will experience. And we'll probably wonder, where did those other people go? They just won't be in our reality. They won't be in our lives one way or another. Mm-hmm. So humanity is going in a multitude of directions based on the choices that we all make as individuals. That determines where we wind up, what kind of a reality we ultimately experience. That's also one of the things that this age is all about, making a choice and experiencing ultimately the reality that is more representative of what you prefer to be. Because as Bashar says, you're not ever changing the world you live on. You're changing yourself, and you shift to a version of Earth that's already representative of the change you made within yourself. The other Earth still exists, and it's still populated by people that choose to be in that version of Earth. And there's an infinite number of those.
It all sounds like we're talking about multidimensional or parallel realities.
We are. And again, that's why it gets into the physics of it, because he starts explaining how this all works vibrationally, because it's all about resonance. Again, what you put out is what you get back. And he means that in totality. He doesn't just mean within your one little life on one little planet. He means every time you make a change, you are literally a different person in a different reality. And we are beginning to realize that. And as we realize that, we can use that idea more consciously to navigate ourselves in the direction of the series of parallel versions of Earth and parallel realities that are more conducive to what we prefer to experience. So it gets a little heady, but he can explain these things in terms of the physics, which is what I enjoy about him.
Well, he has such wit and clever ways of answering, and makes it fun, that it's always a joy to hear him speak, and you could really get into it and start to understand it, because he does make it more practical and applicable to our lives.
And it's important that he does so. He understands that we're having a physical experience, and he understands that we need a physical effect in order to really grasp what these concepts are all about. And that's why it's also important from his point of view that we let go of old-fashioned definitions of things and understand how they actually work in physics terms, so that we can streamline these definitions into modern 21st century versions that don't confuse the issue with outdated medieval definitions that don't really explain what's actually happening. They might describe the experience or the effect that we're perceiving, but those old-fashioned definitions quite often do not accurately describe the mechanism that is causing those experiences. And there's a big difference between those. For example, one he often uses is just the idea, let's say, of telepathy. Most people would say, okay, telepathy, what is telepathy? Well, telepathy is when you can read someone else's mind. That's the effect, apparently, that you experience when you experience telepathy. But Bashar says that's not what's actually mechanically happening. You don't ever read anyone else's mind. What happens is you identify with them so strongly, you mirror them so strongly, you're on the same or a similar enough wavelength with them that you have the same thoughts at the same time. That's very different than the idea that you're reading someone else's mind. It's that you become like two tuning forks vibrating in harmony, and because you're on the same wavelength, you can't help but have the same kinds of thoughts. And that's why people who are in love often know exactly what each other is thinking, right, finish each other's sentences. Again, it's not because they're reading each other's mind, it's because they're vibrating in harmony and have the same thoughts simultaneously. So that's a description of the mechanism. The apparent effect, the experience seems to be that you're reading someone else's mind. But by letting that old definition go and understanding that you are actually just having the same thoughts at the same time, that explains to you how it works, because now you understand it's all about vibration. It's all about identifying and vibrationally being compatible with someone on a similar wavelength, and now you're getting into the physics of it. And that's easier to understand how to make it work again.
Right, and this is how channeling works for me, is to, you too, to get into that vibration where the frequency meet, and they can work together. Exactly. And you spoke a lot with me about that, and that really helped me a lot. I can't help but think about this. It seems like Bashar is part of our contact. We always talk about contact and disclosure. This is Bashar coming through is like contact, isn't it?
This is the first stages of first contact. This is how they go about it. At least his civilization. They find a way to deliver information to the society that they wish to contact, if they feel the society is at least somewhat open to that, because they'll never intervene or interfere if they feel that the society is not. But once they feel that they've received, in a sense, an invitation, they will usually, by this methodology of channeling, deliver information to the society and observe what they do with it. And whatever the society does with it gives them the understanding of how ready or not that society is for further contact, for more physical contact. So first, they want the society to understand the information, understand where they're coming from, and see whether or not that's a direction that the society itself or individuals within that society also prefers to go in. Because again, the more vibrationally compatible we become with them, the easier it is to have contact, because in their own reality, they're very, very different from us. They operate on a completely different frequency level, and we would have a tough time interacting with them if there was no common ground that had been established in these communications. So yes, this communication, the sharing of information, and observing how we take it into our lives is the first stage of actual contact between Earth and another civilization.
And your movie discusses this too, and I think, and your movie kind of leads up to that and talks about what's happening as we're shifting ourselves, and then being able to come through. And this brings up the question of, everybody wants to know, do we have our own ETs we're in touch with? Do we have our own guides? Do we have our own spirit or angelic beings that help us?
I mean, I don't think we're ever alone. I mean, you know, whether everyone is in touch with an ET specifically, I don't know. I do believe we all have guides of some form, reminding everyone also that our own higher mind is also our own guide. But I think that we are always being given what we need from some source. And it's not so much a matter of having to ask them to give us more, but it's more a matter, from my perspective, of us paying more attention to what we're already being given. Because I think they're giving us everything they possibly can. They have no reason to really hold anything back that they believe is beneficial to us. Now and then they might hold back what they think might not be appropriate at the moment, or might be too much for us, or something that we're just not ready for, or would interfere with our own process. They'll never do that. So those kinds of things, they'll wait, but there is a timing to everything. But in terms of what they are able to give us, I don't think they ever hold that back, ever. So it's not so much that we have to feel like, we have to ask them, please, please, please give me something. They're giving it to us. We just need to be in a state where we're paying more attention to what we're already getting.
So it's please, 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 I need to pay attention.
I need to pay attention. Yeah. And that sort of connects over to the idea of things like prayer, because prayer, again, is not so much asking for what you don't have. It's being in a state of gratitude for what is, and then realizing how much you actually do have right here, right now, and being able to work with that. So I think that's a very different state than the idea of saying, please give me something I don't have, because then all you're doing is reinforcing the idea that you don't have it, and it remains invisible to you.
And being appreciative and having gratitude raise your frequency automatically.
Exactly. And then your senses become more acute to higher frequency energies, which means you can then perceive might already be there on a higher frequency level that was invisible to you before, because you weren't on a level where you could perceive it.
That's it, you guys. That is the secret to connecting with your guides. I'm asked this question all the time. I'm sure you are too, Darryl. And that's it. It's getting your vibration and that feeling of gratitude, appreciation, the higher joy. And that's when you start noticing and feeling.
Yeah, I mean, look at this. Look at the synchronicity of the term. We use the term appreciation for money, right? And what happens when your money appreciates? It grows, right? And therefore, the more you are in appreciation, you grow. Your senses expand. You're able to perceive more. You are able to receive more, because you're now on a vibratory level that is commensurate with those things. Again, goes back to the physics principle that Bashar often shares, where he's basically saying, look, you cannot experience something you're not on the vibratory level of. You have to be equal to that frequency. Otherwise, it's just invisible to you. That's just simple physics. Even Einstein basically hinted at the idea that a problem can't be solved from the same level the problem was created in. You have to go to the level of the solution. It's a different frequency. It's a different way of looking at something. And so you cannot really experience what you're not the vibration of. Conversely, and this is also equally important, once you're on a certain vibratory level, you can only experience the things that are commensurate with that level. This gets into the idea of people being worried about following their passion, because a lot of people, and I hear this, and Bashar hears this over and over and over again. It's like, well, I'd love to follow my passion, but what if I do and something bad happens?
Right.
Okay. What they're not hearing is that's not a definition of passion. A true definition of passion cannot contain something happening that is opposite to the vibration of that state. So the idea that they're afraid that something might happen is another state altogether. They're creating a contradictory linkage between passion and fear. So the idea is they have to understand what's causing that fear. It's usually a belief, a definition they've bought into somewhere along the way growing up. Parents, school, friends, society has fed them an idea that is out of alignment with who they really truly are. But they've made that association that if they try to be themselves, that something bad will happen, something will go wrong. They need to break that link in order to only experience the state of their passion, and not this contradictory, confused state that passion generates something to be afraid of. That is not a definition of passion. And it's important to have that level of clarity in the definitions in order to experience the result of those states of beings purely, rather than creating this sort of weird hybrid state, which is its own reality, which means the only thing you can experience is acting on your passion and something going wrong.
Right. Passion does not create pain.
Right. That's its own state. And people have to understand that that's a completely different state with a completely different reality attached to it.
Interesting. What does Bashar say about one source or God or a creator or the divine? What's his
Well, they
thoughts on
simply
that?
represent it as all that is.
Oh,
To
that
them,
is, yeah.
it's literally everything. In other words, we're part of it. There's
Yes.
nowhere where it's not. We're made out of it, whatever you want to call it. God, Goddess, all that is. It doesn't matter what you name it, because there's nothing you can name that's not it.
Yeah. Because
So
it is everything.
it's everything. And therefore, we, in a sense, are reflections of it. We're aspects of it, experiencing itself through us and everything that is in existence. It is existence itself. It's existence that is aware of itself. That's what he's explained all that is. It's existence that is aware of itself. And it is aware of itself through all of us, through everything that it is in its existence. It's like being in a hall of mirrors and looking at all the reflections. But in this case, all those reflections are also conscious.
I love it. Yeah, it's all these holograms, right? I think
Exactly.
it's important everybody hears this, that this all that is not separate from yourself. You are
No.
all that is, as
Yeah,
you
it
are.
can't be
I am.
separate.
No.
It cannot be separate. I mean, that's the whole, again, we go back to that idea that, we're already trusting, we're already confident about something. People have experiences of feeling disconnected from source.
Yes. Yes. Huge.
But you cannot be disconnected. In fact, ironically and paradoxically, the only way you can actually have an experience of disconnection is to be connected.
Yeah, I know I get what you're saying. I do get it.
It's a paradoxical thing, and people skip over it very easily because it's so obvious. But when you stop and think about it, it's like you have to be connected. You have to be a part of Source in order to have any experience at all. So even an experience of disconnection has to be coming from the fact that you're connected.
Okay, well, let's talk about this then. There's an influx, it seems to be, of suicide rate. And there's many reasons they're saying why. Some of it's social media, other reasons.
Sure.
But that there's that sense of disconnection or
And
separateness.
some disconnection.
What
Yes.
does Bashar, or what does he, or what would he say about this suicide?
Well,
aspect?
again, it goes down to the idea of the beliefs, the idea of belief that we're not worthy, belief that we're not self-empowered, belief that we're not connected, belief that we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't be who we really are. It's buying into things that don't allow us to know that we really have the tools we need to be as powerful as we need to be without having to hurt ourselves or anyone else in order to get what we need in life. So that's why it's so important that he's delivering this idea of this toolkit and this instruction manual, because if people understand how reality works, how existence is structured, and how to take advantage of that, then everyone can know that they have the self-empowerment tools to feel the connection, and that the only reason they feel disconnected is because they've been taught to believe in a choice that results in that sensation. And it's not necessarily true or real, but it's real when they experience it. The experience is real, but it's not empirically real that they're actually disempowered. It's not empirically real that they're disconnected. They have to see through the smoke and mirrors. They have to see through the illusion to know that that's not actually true. That's what the instruction manual does. It teaches you how to see through the illusion of the definitions that don't work for us and change them to definitions that do.
You know, I want to make another point on that. What I really like about Darryl's work and what Bashar's doing is that I mentioned earlier, he has hundreds of CDs and DVDs. If you miss any of his events and you're not in the LA area, which I've been able to see him in LA and Orange County and, because I'm in the area. But if you're not, you can download these at a very reasonable price. He has topics he does, and I appreciate him because he does touch on all these topics we're talking about today. Yes. You download the whole thing and watch it in the privacy of your own home. And I know you do live streaming. That's been very successful for people to be able to follow you around the world.
Absolutely. And if they want to know what we're doing next, or they want to download or buy any of the sessions that have already existed, or they even want a private session, as you mentioned, with Bashar, all they have to do is go to bashar.org, and they can find out all of that and browse to their heart's content.
And you guys, there's going to be a lot more links below too, as we're talking, where you can find him, upcoming events, his movies, his books, all this stuff. But if you are feeling disconnected in that illusion that you just mentioned, Darryl, you can find something there on his website that I guarantee will help you. The wit and humor, I'm going to say it again, that Bashar uses can't help but make you laugh and find joy and passion in your life again. It's brilliant.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
I continue to do it because, I get people coming back and say, I finally applied the information.
Yes.
And it made such a big difference. And I feel so much better. And my life has so much more synchronicity and joy in it. That's extremely gratifying to know that people can apply it and that it can work, and to hear that their lives have vastly improved. And it's really cool. It's really, really, really gratifying.
It is very cool. Now, Darryl, we're at the point in the show where I like to ask my guests to say anything that you think would inspire them to be their greatest selves. As we're talking about today, this is all about being your greatest self. What would you like to say as Darryl to the guests?
Well, again, it's kind of like it's always worked for me. It really can work for you to follow your passion. And, I sort of look at it in one of the ways that Bashar's framed it that I really enjoy visualizing is the idea that we're all puzzle pieces, and we were all made to be the shape that we were made to be, and we're all different. But when we allow our shape to be valid, then we join with all the other shapes that are also validating themselves, and we create the big picture. And then the big picture can support us, and we can support the big picture. So if we try to be a shape we're not, we don't fit anymore in the big picture, and that's why we feel it can't support us. So even though I know sometimes because of our belief systems and what we've been taught that it seems to be the most difficult thing to be yourself, it's actually the easiest thing.
Yes.
It is really the most difficult thing to try and be someone you're not. That's where all the pain, all the suffering comes from, is pretending to be something we're not. When we truly are who we know we are and really align with that vibration, that signature frequency that is us, our passion, our excitement, our joy, our creativity, our love, things flow so much more easily. And I like this saying. It's kind of like Bashar said, look, there are currents, in a sense, in the energy of creation. There's a flow. So the idea is go with the flow because the current knows where you need to go. The idea of surrender is not giving up control. It's surrendering to the control that's already built into the flow. So if you just go with it, you will wind up exactly where you need to wind up, exactly when you need to wind up there. It works perfectly. You don't need to make it work. You just need to allow it to work because it already works just fine.
I love that. And then you get to really experience yourself. Yeah. And then a lot of these other hardships around yourself just start to melt away and fall away.
It just takes honest self-investigation in order to know the difference between what is truly our excitement and what is anxiety disguised as excitement, because we can fool ourselves because we're afraid to look. But if we're really not afraid to look, if we understand that we are truly reflections of creation and that we are these greater beings and that we do deserve to exist and that we are worthy of joy, and we just investigate our definitions and really let go of the ones that don't work for us, it really makes such a difference. I can't even begin to say how much of a difference it makes. You have to experience it for yourself, and paradoxically, you have to allow those who refuse to experience that to refuse to experience that. Because if you want to be allowed to be yourself, you have to allow others to make the choices that they make, even if they make painful choices. It's just the way it works. Because we have to remember that we are all eternal and infinite beings. There's really, in a sense, no rush, no hurry. We'll all get it somewhere, somehow, some way. So it's not about being desperate about, I have to hurry, I have to get this, or that person has to understand this now. We're all eternal beings. We're not going anywhere. We constantly change. We constantly have new experiences. And somewhere in all of those infinite experiences, we'll get it.
Wow. Very, very well said. So I want to thank you so much, Darryl, for coming on the show and talking to our audience here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate these kinds of opportunities and what you're doing. So thank you.
And what can you share with the audience now about what's coming up for you as we begin to say
Well,
goodbye?
I have a new sci-fi novel out called Shards of a Shattered Mirror, Book One, series of 5 books, but just Book One is out now. They can go to DarrylAnka.com to buy that. Zia Films is working on a new film. I'm not going to tell you anything so much about it right now, except the title of it is Outside the Box. So that should tell you something.
I'm excited.
So that will be coming up, and we'll be announcing that. Plus, again, we have many other Bashar events coming up,
Yes.
and again, they can go to bashar.org to find out about all of that and the things that Bashar has already talked about.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a joy and a pleasure. Talk about following your passion. It's great to hear you speak because you know that's what you're doing. And I so appreciate you being here. So thank you again, Darryl. It's been a treat.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So there you have it, you guys. Here's a gentleman who's out there really pushing his own boundaries, yet he's staying true to himself. He's finding joy and passion within who he is and being his unique self. Now, I suggest you get out there and allow yourself to be embraced by your own passion and see what happens for you next. And definitely check out Bashar's videos and what he shares, because I guarantee it'll help you put you right in the mood and the mojo to be passionate about your life. Until next time, this is Creative Visions TV. I'm your host, Karen Dahlman. Now get out there and explore the expansive universe that is within you. And I'll see you later. Bye-bye.